Good morning, everyone. I'm Dee Dosberg,
I'm Kevin George.
and we are here to talk with you this morning about courageous conversations. We've been thinking a lot about this on our campus and what a great community we are a part of, and how much we would very much like us to have more conversations with people who are actually different from us in terms of values and maybe differing opinions and thoughts. And it's so easy on a campus to gravitate to the people who are most like you. And yet we want to really bring a challenge to our campus to have you actively seek out people that may be different from you, may have different backgrounds, ideologies, and values. So today we're going to talk a little bit about courageous conversations, what they are, why they're important to have, and what they might look like.
Yeah, so Dee and I are just gonna kind of talk back and forth about what they are and why we want to have them. Sound
Sure,
good?
yeah.
Yeah. So when we were kind of coming up with this, I started thinking about, why do we actually seek out these courageous conversations? So some of the things that I thought about were, it may be within a relationship you have, maybe with your friends or a partner or a friend group even, maybe with a professor. And so one of the reasons is maybe to express an experience that didn't quite feel okay, but we feel the need to say something about it, hopefully with the intent of maybe deepening that connection and relationship. Another reason I thought about was specifically related to maybe our organizations and campus community, is to kind of raise awareness of something that maybe we're not even aware of, or maybe the campus community as a whole isn't aware of, that is probably important that we talk about. And so a lot of times these things that we want to bring to awareness are difficult, especially because if it's something that's easy, typically someone would have talked about it at some point, right?
Right.
And so, and then the other reason it's connected to that would be maybe there's an awareness of this thing that exists, but no one really wants to dive in because it just doesn't feel quite safe. So those are some of the reasons, and there's many other reasons. But ultimately, what we can get from this is a greater sense of community, of connection, and personal growth. So even if something doesn't happen within that relationship, you're going to get something out of it as an individual by inviting this and seeking out a courageous conversation.
Yep, so as I'm listening to you, Kevin, I'm thinking about this idea that there are things that happen in our day-to-day lives. There are interactions that happen, and I may be talking with somebody, a faculty member or a staff member, a student, and I may say something that just lands on them the wrong way. And if I don't know it, if they don't give me feedback, if they don't have the courage to come and talk with me about what happened or what I said that could have been offensive or maybe raised a question about who I am and what my values are, then I don't have any opportunity to correct it. And so I know part of those courageous conversations is having the courage to have your voice, to be vulnerable, and to trust that you can give feedback, that you can talk about what the concern is, that you can raise the issue that you're talking about that maybe other people don't want to talk about. And hopefully the person on the other end is going to hear you in a way that will matter. So, we know that there are actually two aspects of having a courageous conversation, because there's the speaker, but there's also the listener. And Kevin and I have talked a lot about this. We really can't take responsibility for what the other person does or doesn't do, what they say or what they don't say. We can only take responsibility for what I communicate.
Right. And I can only take responsibility for what I communicate.
Right. So what I say to you, and then you may not be the best listener, and I may walk away going, well, that didn't work. However, if I took responsibility for communicating with you in a courageous way to give you feedback, I know that at least I've had my voice, and maybe I've raised some awareness on your part. Maybe I've said something that you didn't know how to respond to, but at least you heard me, even if I didn't get the response I wanted.
Absolutely, yeah. And then as I hear that, then I have the opportunity to decide how I receive it as well. So not just communicate, but also how do I receive that? And so that actually lends itself to kind of like, well, what does a courageous conversation look like?
Right.
How do we go about actually having these things?
Yeah, so when you think about a courageous conversation, we're thinking about you bring to it, if you are the listener, because Kevin has done a great job of addressing what you can do to initiate a courageous conversation and why that would be so important. If you are the receiver of that very courageous conversation and someone is giving feedback or talking to you and giving you an insight into their perspective, really what your main job is to bring an attitude of curiosity rather than a position of challenge. So you may not agree with what their perception was. You may think, well, that's not actually what happened. But in that moment, if you're really engaged in a courageous conversation, part of courage is listening without having to feel defensive. So it's this idea of bringing in curiosity, tell me more about that. Your goal is not to take on the other person's values, but it's to understand in a way that helps that person to be seen. You want that person to be seen. So when you listen with unconditional positive regard, without an agenda, when you listen with empathy, and when you're being congruent to who you are and the openness of really hearing from somebody, that is just as important as speaking. So it's what we say, and it's especially how we listen and how we receive.
Yeah, and that gets me thinking about how like it's all connected when you're initiating it and you're receiving it, and then there becomes this exchange. It's kind of like a dance within the conversation, where at times one person is leading, at times another person is leading, kind of guiding things based on what they're sharing. So yeah, when you're providing empathy and unconditional positive regard, you're doing that and sitting back and trying to genuinely understand the other person's experience as if it's your own. And you're maintaining that sense of congruence. So if something comes up for you and it's something you feel like is affecting maybe the space and the interaction between the two of you, there's a courage there that can help you share, that experience. And that in turn helps the other person feel like they're being able to see you as well.
So all that authenticity and also vulnerability, Brene Brown talks a lot about in order to connect,
Yeah.
you have to be willing to be vulnerable. And that vulnerability is what actually connects people in a real significant way. And so again, talking about our campus, being able to show up with that intentionality, that presence, bringing into it even attitudes of active listening. So if someone says, hey, I want to give you some feedback about an interaction, Kevin, I want to tell you something that really landed on me in a way that was hard for me.
Yeah.
You have to know, if you don't have the time to hear me in that moment, it's really good to say, you know what, I really want to hear from you. I just don't have time right now because I've got to get to my next class, or I've got these papers to grade, but would you come back and name a time and create space for that person to return and talk with you? And then that attitude of having the time and also wanting to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're like me, I get super defensive if someone's going to give me critical feedback. I mean, on the one hand, I really want it, and on the other hand, it makes me feel bad, and so there's a part of me that can be defensive, like, oh, that's not what I meant, or I'm so sorry that's how you saw it.
Right.
And that may not actually be helpful to the person who's speaking. So to just be able to say, I am so sorry that happened. I am so sorry that's what I gave to you in that moment.
Yeah, and knowing,
Period.
yeah, exactly, period. You end to start an apology with a period. And that in and of itself, what you just described, Dee, that's congruence. And so you're immediately bringing that presence to, even before the courageous conversation technically happens, you're providing that congruence. This is where I am right now. And then being empathetic, I can tell that this is something that's really important for you to share with me.
Yeah.
And I want to make the time. So then you're sharing that investment. And so then that's the beginnings of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it actually happens is also knowing that this may be hard to hear. And probably things are going to come up for you that are uncomfortable. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with what the person is saying. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's okay. It's normal to have those feelings. And then it provides a greater opportunity for y'all to share that with each other, and then move through and just to understand each other again, deepen that connection, maybe provide some insights for yourself or the other person that might be helpful for them to consider, and then they get to choose what they do with that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I like what you said about feelings. Basically, they're transitory. Just because
Right.
you have a negative feeling or an upset feeling doesn't mean you're always going to feel that way. And just because the person may be upset with you, they're not always going to be upset, because feelings, they do come and go. But that opportunity to really express and talk and share and open up dialogue to better
Yes.
understand somebody else's experience, background, viewpoint, that is the goal of a courageous conversation. We know that our campus culture, we talk a lot about our campus community and wanting to take care of each other. If you think about our mission statement, that we're committed to an experiential liberal arts education, and we encourage personal growth that inspires artistic and intellectual and social action. We really want to focus on the personal growth aspect of courageous conversations, because when you open yourself up to that, you experience personal growth and you create an opportunity for another person to experience their own personal growth. And that is at the heart of what we do here as an educational institution.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's the best way to affect change, is to role model it.
Yeah.
So if you're investing in these courageous conversations and trying to bring that attitude of presence to your interactions, that's how you're going to affect change. So yeah, investing in that personal growth, that's where it starts.
Yep. So Kevin, before we go,
Yeah.
I hear the bell ringing.
Right.
Can you share with our audience, whoever that may be, COAL, COAL, that little nugget that you
Yeah.
gave me, and coal under pressure becomes diamond, so
Exactly.
I love it. But
Yeah.
can you just talk about what the COAL stands for? It's just a great little mnemonic device to remember what you can do when you're coming into a courageous conversation.
Yeah, so if you just remind yourself, when you get that initial surge of, oh, what is this going to be? Just think of coal, maintaining curiosity of your own reactions and experience, and the other person's reactions and their story and your story, and understanding of that, and being open to that, being open to whatever comes up. So that's going to allow things to flow within you, and like Dee said, the emotions are transitory. The more we're open to them, the more likely they are to happen, and then kind of let go. And accepting. So acknowledging that it's okay, you can accept another person's viewpoint and you don't have to take it on as your own. And likewise, you can have a reaction within yourself that could be difficult, maybe you don't really like, and you can still accept it and know that it's real. And loving. That sometimes can be hard, especially with someone who doesn't maybe share your same viewpoints. And maybe even especially towards ourselves sometimes. So like Dee was saying, personal growth is where this all starts. And so if you can turn that love and give that to yourself first, that makes it easier to then provide it for other people.
I love it. So
Yeah.
remember COAL, curiosity, open, accepting, and loving.
Yeah,
That is the spirit of a courageous conversation.
absolutely.
Thank you guys for listening today. And Kevin and I know that we may have other conversations about this, but we invite you to contact either one of us if you have questions, or if you want to gather a group of people together to have more conversation about these kinds of conversations.
Right.
We'd be
Or to
happy
have one.
Yeah, we'd be happy to help with that. So
Yeah.
thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Dee. I
Kevin.
appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate your time too. Thanks so much.